Right now, I'd like to welcome my first guest, Chris Hogan. For more than a decade, author and financial coach Chris Hogan of Ramsey Solutions has been spreading his message of hope and financial peace to audiences across the country. He's helped Americans everywhere reach their retirement goals through his live events, podcasts, his best-selling book, Retire Inspired. It's not an age, it's a financial number. He's an expert on mortgages and investing, and we're happy to have him with us on the income generation. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you.
You know, Chris, I have to ask you a favor. We were talking in the show about how calculating your number is an important step. But as you heard, we're also talking about the fact that's not necessarily the be-all and end-all, because people living long, you don't really know what kind of unexpected things are going to happen in the future. So if I'm really nice to you on the show today, can I get you to just add one more chapter to the end of your book if I talk really nice?
Oh, wow. Okay, what might that be?
About all those questions. You know, we talked about it off air, so I know that you share my concerns about medical costs and what happens. So give me some points, if you will, about what people need to be careful of and maybe how they can protect themselves to a certain degree on these medical costs, which are hard to quantify when you're sitting there on the day of your retirement.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you start to look at medical costs and expenses, you can start to understand that they can really start to snowball and get big really fast. And so I would encourage people out there just to be mindful of your coverage, understand what you have and what it protects. What are things that are going to be inside of your network and covered versus things that are out of pocket or outside of your network? We have to have an understanding. And we want to go into it with our eyes wide open to know what it is, what it covers, and what are some potential gaps. And I think the best way to go about that is to make sure you're educating yourself, that you're sitting down with an insurance professional to really understand what you have and what's available.
So that's great for basic medical expenses, but as you know, Medicare and Medicare supplements don't do much for convalescent care or home health care. And let's face it, nobody wants to go to a convalescent facility. So how about that? How about home health care? I mean, do you tell people that if they can afford it, or maybe even if they can't afford it, they should look into long-term care insurance?
Well, long-term care insurance is definitely a part of your financial plan, especially when you start to look at insurance. I mean, at the end of the day, insurance is risk management. In exchange for a payment, you get coverage. And so I encourage people by the time they're 59 to really start to look into getting long-term care insurance in place. That would help you if you were in a nursing home or you became incapacitated for an extended period of time. Now, I also caution people, depending upon your family's medical history or things that have gone on in the past, it may be something you need to take a look at sooner as opposed to later. But I think it's always a good thing to have those conversations, understand the protection, and also for kids out there, adult children who have parents that are aging or getting up there, have that conversation with mom or dad or even your grandparents to understand what covers they have and where the information is located if and when it was needed.
It's amazing. People are afraid to have these conversations, and they should, because you're right. A lot of people, by the time they get older, they can no longer afford the long-term care insurance, and that's if they're even healthy enough to get it. So Chris, we need to take a commercial break here. Will you stay with us for a couple more segments?
I would be honored.
And I'd like you to stay with us also. We have a lot more from my new friend, Chris Hogan. We'll be right back. But right now, I'd like to welcome back Chris Hogan. Chris, you know, I'm glad to hear that you recommend long-term health care. A lot of financial people don't understand insurance. They don't talk about it, so I'm glad you recommend that. I'm glad you recommend that children aren't afraid to have these conversations sooner rather than later with their parents. So I assume that means that you're also a fan with younger folks of disability insurance, correct?
Well, I think absolutely. I think it's very, very important for us to be able to protect ourselves if we run into a scenario where we're no longer able to work. That might be for a short term, or it could be even a longer term period of time. And especially when you start to have younger people that have families. You start to get the little ones and young people in your home that you're responsible for. You need to be able to provide for them. And so understanding what disability insurance does and for how long is very, very vital. And so I want to encourage everyone out there to sit down, talk to an insurance professional, understand what coverage you have through your job. You may have short-term disability available to you there, but then you may need to look at looking at long-term disability outside of the job. And so that's something you'd have to put into place for yourself.
Now, what's interesting is if somebody gets started on the right foot, For example, I know you're a fan of people saving as much as 15% of their paycheck if they can. So if you get used to those insurance costs and you just budget them in and you save your 15%, when it comes to applying for long-term care insurance, what you're really doing is just switching your disability insurance premiums for long-term care insurance premiums, because long-term care is really nothing other than disability insurance for retired people, right?
It really is as you look at it. And if you start to look at just the percentage out there, the statistics are staggering of people that once they're age 65 or older, the odds of them needing long-term care, it's staggering. And so it's very, very important for us to look at this and understand. I mean, ultimately, we're working hard to be able to provide for ourselves in our financial future. We just need to make sure we have the right coverages around to be able to protect it.
So you say that it's all about knowing your number. How does one determine what that number might be?
Well, when I talk about the number, I'm talking about people being able to live their dreams. Ultimately, I'm talking about people putting away enough and knowing that they have enough put away that they're in their investments, they could create an income stream, essentially to be able to replace your paycheck. And so with that, we developed a free tool called the RIQ, the Retire Inspired Quotient. It's a free tool at my website, chrishogan360.com, where you can plug in a few basic numbers and understand what's the big number you need to have put away. And if you're a little bit behind, it'll show you what you need to be investing now so you can catch up and get there.
So you calculate that number, but then what do you do for a buffer for these types of contingencies? What do you tell people? Or do you assume that if people have really good goals, and a lot of people who have lots of retirement goals, let's face it, they actually spend a little more money in retirement than they do when they were working. They never expect that, but it's the truth.
Right.
And maybe are you thinking that, as a good friend of mine in the business says, you go from your go-go years to your slow-go years to maybe your no-go years, and what was an expense for fun stuff just becomes more of a medical expense at that point. Is that kind of how you look at it, or do you look at a different buffer?
Well, I think it's number one, there's a couple things I want people to bring into retirement, but there's a whole lot of things I want them to bring. There's a couple things I don't want them to bring. I don't want them to bring not having a plan, and I definitely don't want them to bring debt of any kind. And so if you start to really look at that, if you're not bringing debt in with you and you're bringing your dreams and your goals, as you start to look at how much you have put away, you do want to be aware. Healthcare costs are a wild card. We're not really sure what's going to happen and how much it could increase. So I would rather people be over-prepared than under-prepared. So being able to look at your coverage that you're going to be able to have to bring with you into retirement as you retire, or if you're working a part-time job and you have some healthcare benefits available to you, or whether you're paying it out of pocket, I think it's very important to look at that overall picture from a 30,000-foot view.
I agree completely. And Chris, we need to leave it there for this segment. I'd like to have you back one more time. And you stay with us also. We'll be right back with more from Chris Hogan. But now, guess what? It's time to welcome back Chris Hogan. So Chris, I know that you've been around for a while doing this as I have. Tell our income generation members about what are some of the challenges that you've seen that maybe people didn't have 30 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges when you start to think about your future and your dreams, I think one of the biggest challenges that has really grown over the last 20 or 30 years is the threat of debt. Debt is one of those things that it steals not from your now, but it also steals from your future. We've all seen and heard about the credit card situation, the trillions amount of dollars that are in debt there, the mortgage situations. But there's a newcomer on the scene here in the last 10 or 15 years, and that's student loan debt. And so with all of these debt types, we're talking about bigger chunks of debt that are going to really require people to get intentional and focus to be able to attack those. You don't want to allow those debts to sit around and hang around for 10 or 15 years for the sheer fact that you're giving up so much future income opportunity by throwing it away by paying interest. And so looking at that and understanding that threat and that the requirement for you to be able to have a plan and to understand how the market is working, the stock market, and how you can best take advantage of 401ks and 403bs. These are tools that we as individuals have as opportunities through our employers to prepare for our future, because pensions are long gone. Those days are very few. And so we have to take that responsibility upon ourselves.
Yeah, and I love to hear what you say about debt. This is great because, I get people coming in all the time. Well, I should keep my mortgage during retirement, right, Dave? Because, I need the tax deduction.
Right.
So if they have a 4% mortgage, I say, okay, well, if I could get you a 4% bank CD right now, FDIC insured, would you want to put some of your money in it? And of course, everyone says, well, of course. Well, if you pay off your mortgage, a penny saved is a penny earned. It's just like having that CD at 4%. But what's interesting is you and your entire group has been preaching this for decades now. But I think we're finally, the tailwind is finally now behind you with this. I was telling somebody earlier today, I had one of the first, right out of college, I had to get a house, and I had one of the first what's called liar loans over 30 years ago, where if you put down 30%, you tell them you make $7 billion a year, they don't even question you, and they give you the loan. So we've had this cheap money, these lenient lending policies now for over 3 decades. But what's finally happening now is it's getting fixed from the root, right? The average investor today is now realizing after 2 major stock market drops since the turn of the century that, you know what, I've got to be careful. I have to pay down my debt, and I've got to do the right things with my money. So are you seeing a philosophical shift, as I am now, with people after the shellackings they took in the stock market, the 2 of them since the turn of the century?
Well, I can tell you, you know how Americans are. We are tough. And we're not scared, right? We'll keep going. The other problem is we also have a short-term memory. We tend to forget. And so this preaching the message of the threat of debt and the importance of planning for your future, I think it's a drum we're all going to have to continue to beat just so people start to understand and really learn the lesson. And so looking at this, I think, is an opportunity for people, especially millennials and zennials out there, to truly jump in and get intentional on the front end. I would also caution baby boomers and Gen Xers and Gen Yers to really start to be smart as you make these real estate decisions. People tend to make home buying decisions emotionally instead of with their business mind. These are business decisions that can impact your future. So you want to go into it with your eyes wide open and understanding and knowing the numbers.
So, well, I guess maybe I was being overly optimistic. I kind of hoped that the headwind was turning into the tailwind. But you're saying that you and I can't take our feet off the accelerator. We have to keep preaching the message as long as we possibly can.
We really do. We have to.
So with that, in the last 45 seconds or so we have in this segment, what would you say are the top 2 pieces of advice that you want to hear our income generation members, those Americans over the age of 50, that you want to have them hear come right from your lips?
Well, that's a great question. The first great piece of information I want for them is to understand, regardless of where you are right now, you're not done yet. It is never too late for you to still chase down progress and to make some realistic changes. You have that opportunity. The second tip is don't go it alone. It is so vital and important for you to reach out and find people that have answers to questions that you have, to be able to help you to get on a game plan and understand that game plan is going to put you in a position to not only win for yourself, but to be able to provide for your family. So it's never too late, and definitely seek help as you need it.
Chris, it's so true. So many people have, they try to go it alone, and very few people have a combination of the ability to have the proper knowledge, but also the proper stomach for it. And as you know, that's where people make the most mistakes, is they make emotional decisions with their money. So, Chris, thanks so much for being with us on the show today. I'd love to have you back if you're willing to come join us at some point.
Well, I sure would. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to having another conversation with you.
Chris, thanks again. We'll be back in just a minute with more on the Income Generation.